So, what were we going to talk about? Oh yeah, the Bible. Let's talk about Genesis 22. Pastor Conady and I actually talked about this chapter 2 years ago on Father's Day week. It was at the same time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to the end of the story because right now I'm here among the Bible Brain Trust. I'm here among the biblical scholars of our church and whatnot. We already know, I'm going to spoil the ending for you. We already know that Isaac does not get sacrificed. Okay? At no point does God actually intend for a child to be sacrificed to him. Real quick, before we even start this, I want to read you guys a story from the 15th chapter of Genesis. Turn with me to the 15th chapter of Genesis. I'm just going to kind of run this down because I don't know why this particular chapter is not read or discussed more frequently. And I'd like you guys to be reading along with me, because I'm going to kind of have my own little commentaries through it as we go. And so you guys will be able to know the difference between that and my commentary. We understand that as Abraham is being asked for a sacrifice, and we know that Abraham is very good at sacrifices. In chapter 22, we're going to see him build his fourth altar. So we understand that Abraham understands the sacrificial system. And the way I put it is, if you're playing baseball and Abraham is on your team, if you hit a triple and you're standing on third base and Abraham is coming to the plate, you better be ready because he's about to sacrifice. There we go. All right. So here's, it's okay. I can laugh at my own jokes. But here is the point at which Abraham in chapter 15 of Genesis is having some doubts about the promises that God is making to him. He's having some doubts about, well, how do I know that I am going to be, my descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars and the grains of sand on the beach and whatnot. As it stands, I don't have any kids at all right now. Even Ishmael hadn't been born yet. And so now this is what God's response is to Abram. God presents himself as a sacrifice to seal this covenant and swears by his own name. Watch this, verse chapter 15. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." He's still called Abram at this point. I think he gets his name changed in verse chapter 17, if I'm not mistaken. But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth." Because it was kind of like his lead slave who was like a son to him and would eventually be like an uncle to Isaac, okay? Eliezer of Damascus. And we can find out more about him. We presume that's the servant of Abraham we're talking about when we get to chapter 24 of Genesis. Verse 3, "You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. We'll be talking when we get to the 22nd chapter about how his faith is made manifest in works, as James would put it in the second chapter of James. Verse 7, "Then the Lord told him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" The Lord told him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Okay, bring me some animals for sacrifice that are in their prime. Okay, bring me a top-notch sacrifice. Verse 10, "So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. We know that is the period between Genesis and Exodus. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them." What's that nation? Egypt. "And in the end, they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." Now, here's where God presents himself as here is where he swears by himself in verse 17. "After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking firepot, a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses." Okay? He is associating himself with the sacrificial animals themselves. "So the Lord made a covenant with Abraham that day and said, 'I have given this land to your descendants all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River, the land now occupied by the Kenites, the Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." All right. That is the story of God presenting himself among the sacrificial animals, swearing by his own name, as it will say later here in chapter 22 of Genesis. That is the precursor to this story that we're about to get to. All right, page 21, week 3. So in the first 2 weeks, we saw the examples of the first sacrifices made by humans. That was Cain and Abel in the 4th chapter of Genesis. And then we saw Noah present a sacrifice on the first time we see the word altar in the Bible. I believe that was the 8th chapter of Genesis. That was last week. And now we're on week 3, and we're about to see the man whom, if I'm not mistaken, builds the most altars of anybody in the Bible, and that is Abraham. What is our study about today? Obedience and trust are marks of allegiance and commitment between individuals. Abraham passed the test of faithfulness to God in his willingness to sacrifice his own son, Isaac, on an altar. Pastor Conady and I actually talked about this chapter 2 years ago on Father's Day week. It was at the same time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to the end of the story, because right now I'm here among the Bible Brain Trust. I'm here among the biblical scholars of our church and whatnot. We already know, I'm going to spoil the ending for you. We already know that Isaac does not get sacrificed. Okay? At no point does God actually intend for a child to be sacrificed to him. God is well aware of this before he even speaks to Abraham about that. So let's keep that in mind, okay? Secondly, from the very first verse of chapter 22, that would be, it says, "Sometime later God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham God called. Yes, he replied, here I am." Let's talk about the nature of testing for a second. I've got a couple of you ready on some Bible verses for me. I'm not going to go through all of the examples that I have here, but I'm going to give you just 2 or 3 examples of testing where we're using the exact same word that is being used in this chapter. It is 5254 in your Strong's Nesal, which means to test, to try, to prove, and to tempt. And this is, in this particular chapter, this is the only time this word is used in Genesis, though it's used 36 times total in the Bible. Let's see here. I had somebody that was on Exodus 15:25. Before we get into these Bible verses, what I want you to notice is every time that there is a test, as it is translated to us today, the person who is being tested is strengthened. All right? God is not testing because he does not know the results. Okay? And I'm going to give you one of my favorite examples is actually in the New Testament of this. when Peter denies Christ 3 times. How do you think he felt at that point? You know? Remember when the man at the tomb said to the women, he says, go tell Jesus' disciples and Peter?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because at that point, Peter didn't feel like a disciple anymore.
Yes.
All right? He needed to be recommissioned. What's happened here is, as we just saw in the 15th chapter, Abraham was a man of great faith. But that didn't keep him from shaking that faith sometimes. His faith shook. Like, well, what happened? Like, for example, instead of trusting God that he would have a son through his wife, Sarah, he goes through Hagar, because his faith is not completely there that he's going to have a kid through his own wife. He has to lie to Abimelech when he thinks that his wife is going to be taken, and he's going to be killed for her and whatnot. He doesn't trust God to protect him through times like this. That will happen between the 15th chapter that I just read and the 22nd chapter that we're about to have right now. How do you think Abraham felt about that? You know, he's going to have a son. He has a son in the previous chapter from Sarah. So the promise of God, he sees that, oh, God was telling the truth. And I've been, as my neighbor would say, I've been acting a fool since then, right? You know? So what is going to happen as we see this test? It's a test, the results of which God already knows. We're about to see Abraham undergo this test, not because God doesn't already know, but because Abraham needs to be strengthened. Let's get just a couple examples here. Who had Exodus 15:25 for me? Okay, that proved, you're reading the King James where it says, there he proved them as the same as test.
Oh, okay.
More modern translations would say test.
Okay.
I'm going to read from the second half of verse 25 through 26. It says, It was there at Marah that the Lord set before them the following decree as a standard to test their faithfulness to him, or to prove them. Verse 26, he said, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his commands and keeping all his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Jehovah Rove, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, the Rapha, Jehovah Rapha, I might be saying that wrong. Anyway. Okay, but now, did God set forth that decree because he needed the people of Israel to obey him? No, he did that to strengthen the people of Israel. Here's Exodus 20:20. Don't be afraid, Moses answered them, the people of Israel, for God has come in this way to test you so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning. Okay? He is testing you to strengthen your fear of him, your respect for him, to keep you from sinning. All right? I'm going to give you a couple others, and if you could check these on your own, you're welcome to do so. Exodus 16:4, Deuteronomy 8:2, and Judges 2:22, all examples of God, quote unquote, testing the people or proving the people for their own sake, to strengthen them. Deuteronomy was 8:2, and Judges was 2:22. Judges 2:22. There are more. If you want to, and again, that is 5254. If you want to look that up in Strong's, and it'll give you 36 times that word is used, though not in the same context. Okay, different context, because people will test each other. You know, it won't be a divine act in such cases as those, but that's where you can find more examples, I am confident. So keep in mind the two things. One, God doesn't need to test for his sake. And secondly, at no point does God actually intend for Isaac to be sacrificed.
Yes.
All right, here we go on the Bible background. Does somebody want to read the first paragraph on that? Go for it.
Today's text opens with Yahweh's shocking command that Abraham
take his son Isaac to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt sacrifice. Why would God make such a terrible command? That Isaac was Abraham's beloved son only heightens our natural aversion to a God who would command the death of a child. It would not do to say that Yahweh wanted to test Abraham. That's what you say. The sentence, sometime later, God tested Abraham, 22:1, does not explain Yahweh's motive. It describes the story that follows. If we want to understand Yahweh's motive for this test, we may find one at 22:12. There, the Lord said, "Now I know that you fear God." After this dramatic narrative had run its course, Yahweh himself said, "Now I know," which seems to suggest strongly that God's motive in testing Abraham was that God wanted to know for sure about Abraham's faith. He already knows. I agree with you. He's strengthening.
Yeah. And I can see that because, just plain on its face, just looking at the text itself, I can see how somebody might say, oh, well, maybe God, he really needed to find out, like he didn't know. So, I'm not, with respect, and this is not a salvation issue, I disagree. I think God already knew the results. Okay? And then Reverend Stone, if you want to just go ahead and finish that off for us. If you want to go through the whole Bible background.
Some will surely object to this line of thought, saying that since God is omniscient, God already knew the quality of Abraham's faith. But this leaves us without an explanation for the test of Abraham. Worse, it paints a picture of a God who is not above putting even his beloved covenant partner through an agonizing emotional ordeal. Then there is still the matter of the biblical text itself and its strong implication that Yahweh wanted to know. If the text presses us toward the idea that the motive for the test was that God wanted to know, should we shrink back from the implication? Surely we have here another example of a biblical paradox. In this text, we have God wanting to know, while in many other biblical texts we find that God sees and knows all. We can take the Genesis 22 narrative at face value, even while affirming the paradoxical and often mysterious ways of God. Yahweh is only the first subject of this narrative. There is also Abraham, who is the central figure. Does he have faith? Will he trust the command of God, who had promised him everything through the beloved Isaac? Few of us will ever face such a test, and for that we can be profoundly grateful. Abraham was faithful to the command of God. After the journey to Moriah, Yahweh knew that. I think Isaac had a part to do with that too.
We'll talk about that a little bit as well, yeah. Let me ask you this, though, and I'm asking this because I haven't found it yet. Do we find any lapses in Abraham's faith after the birth of Isaac? I don't think I've found one. I don't think I've seen him take a misstep in that regard after Isaac is born to a 90-year-old wife. I think it's at that point he's kind of
I believe that his faith may have come to a pinnacle at that point.
Yeah.
In the development, as we know, he was his faith was being developed from the time he was called from his homeland and all the ordeals that he went through and the doubts that he had. I believe that when this finally came, because Sarah was so old, past childbearing, and she was incapable of having a child, and so was he, and Isaac was born out of a dead womb, so he already knew about God's resurrecting power. This was like real huge.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
if you've ever experienced anything like that, I don't think you would have any doubts about God. So I think he had reached his pinnacle.
Yeah.
You
When I
said
was
something
born.
when you talked about the journey of Abraham,
Mhm.
that essentially his faith was because this test doesn't look to me to be one where God is trying to produce faith. He's trying to reveal the faith that has already been produced, in my opinion. But you said from this opportunity to this opportunity to this thing to that thing. It is the biggest thing, I think, in my opinion. He wanted a child in the worst way. And in the fear of not being able to get one, he does something probably in his own. Because think about it, even when we mess up, isn't it a thought in your mind like, how did I do that? How did I get here? I don't doubt that he's thinking to himself, what the what? What did I do? And so finally, you get Isaac. And it's like this culmination of all of these faith-producing opportunities that God has provided him. And now you're like, this isn't where I have to figure it out anymore. I may know that I know that I know that this is not only the true and living God, but this is the God that's going to make sure that my steps are ordered, that he cares about my outcomes. And as badly as I messed up, not that my child was a mistake per se, but as badly as I messed up, God, he even made that okay. So I just feel like by that time, what more could you, what else you got?
Yeah.
It's not like whatever you say, God, I'm there. I'm there. I don't see it. If there was something, it's not recorded to my knowledge.
Well, if you guys find it later, I'd be all ears about it, but I haven't found it myself. To answer Reverend Stone's question from earlier, this is going to kind of get us into a segue of the way the Hebrews and the New Testament looked back on this and thought that this is how they thought that Abraham was thinking at the time. They believed that Abraham saw this as the sacrifice of Isaac, or the words literally meaning the offering up of Isaac, as offer up usually through fire, was a necessary part of the fulfillment of the covenant. Here's what it says in, and the word for sacrifice, or the word for test, by the way, is 3985 in Strong's. Go to G 3985, as in Greek 3985. It'll be in the second half of Strong's, which also means to test, to tempt, to try, to examine. But here's what it says in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 19. This is the NLT version, and it gives us some insight into the way the Hebrews believed Abraham was thinking. It goes like this. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that, here it is, verse 19. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again.
Yes.
And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Because God told him to sacrifice your son, and then he had at least a 3-day journey to think about it. All right? So in his mind, his son's already dead. Probably didn't tell his wife, So
he was born from a dead woman.
Yeah.
And God brought him forth.
Mm-hmm. Born from a dead woman.
So as a matter of fact, he told his servants, "You stay here. Me and the boy will return."
Mm-hmm.
He told them, "We're gonna return."
Yeah.
And then he also said, when Isaac asked him, "Where's the sacrifice?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He said, "Well, the Lord will
Provide.
That's
Jehovah Jireh.
Yeah.
Jehovah Jireh. So
That's good.
he's going into this in a certain sense, and I know, and I'm not knocking anybody or any commentary that says something like, this was, an agonizing thing where Abraham believed he was going to kill his son and would be dead forever. But even the Hebrews, by the New Testament time, would say, No, he looked at this as a necessary part of the fulfillment of the covenant, reasoning that he would come back from the dead. Now, that kind of faith. Now, and I'm not trying to denigrate his faith, because that's an extreme amount of faith. Nobody had come back from the dead yet. Okay, they hadn't seen the people, Lazarus, or any of the people that Jesus rose from the dead, or Jesus himself rising from the dead. He was having faith in an event that had no precedence whatsoever. So I think we can definitely give him credit for that kind of faith. All right. So what were we going to talk about? Oh yeah, the Bible. Let's talk about Genesis 22. But I'm going to read the whole chapter to you, and then we'll get into breaking it up. Let's get the whole story out, and then we'll break it up. I'm going to read the NLT, and as you know, I occasionally give my own little commentary as we go, so please read along in your Bible so you know that I'm not just adding my own words to Scripture here, okay? Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, "Here I am." And if you watched Pastor Chris and I teach this a couple years ago, you know the significance of "here I am," which will be said more than once in this chapter as 2009 in Strong's. Verse 2, "Take your son, your only son." By the way, hey, every time I say your son in this, can you guys just shout back at me, "Your only son"?
Oh, I like that. I like that.
It's going to be 3 times in this chapter. Can you guys do that for me? Here we go. Verse 2, "Take your son,
Your only son.
Yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you." Some of your translations will say, "Go and offer him up," usually through fire. Verse 3, "The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped down wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day," and by the way, I don't think he's been to this place before, by the way. I don't think this is like a location that, was some kind of common travel destination. Yet it would be. We'll see where it goes in the future. Verse 4, "On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance." That's 3 days later. Verse 5, "Stay here with the donkey," Abraham told the servants. "The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." Verse 6, "So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, 'Father?' 'Yes, my son, here I am,' Hineni 2009, Abraham replied. 'We have the fire and the wood,' the boy said, 'but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?' 'God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son,' Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar, the 4th one that he builds in Genesis, and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, 'Abraham, Abraham.' 'Yes,' Abraham replied. 'Hineni, here I am.' 'Don't lay a hand on the boy,' the angel said. 'Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son.'
Your only son.
Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering, in place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yireh, or Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. This is what the Lord says. Because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your son,
Your only son.
I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me. All the nations. What's included in all the nations?
All of the Gentiles.
Those filthy Gentiles.
Yes.
Verse 19, and they returned to the servants and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. We'll talk about those last, 4 verses of the chapter, which could have just as easily gone into the next chapter when we get there. But that's more of a setting of the stage for the next portion of the narrative of Abraham and his descendants. All right. So with that, I'm going to read the first 3 verses again, and then, or actually somebody else read the first 3 verses, and then I'll read the Bible background on that.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son,
Your only son,
whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about.
All right. Regarding verse 1, the passage of time represented by the term sometime later indicates that Abraham was settled and comfortable in the land that God had led him to inhabit. When God called him, Abraham knew God's voice and replied, here I am. He was ready and willing to obey the Lord's instructions. Is this the first time he's done that? What was he, 70-something? He's in his late 70s when he's living in his father's tent, kicking back, playing video games, chilling out, doing nothing with his life. He could have done that the rest of his life and been fine. Okay? But was he fulfilling the call? Was he fulfilling the call to adventure that God calls for all of us? Was he answering the challenge that God offers to all of us, especially men? Because I'm openly sexist? Okay. He offers this to women as well in different ways. He offers us equal challenges, but different challenges. Regarding verse 2, because we'll see by verse 3, it says, early the next morning. He didn't mess around. He didn't think about this for a while. Okay. But here, regarding verse 2, God knew how much Abraham valued his son Isaac. Abraham and Sarah had waited for 25 years for the promise of having this child to be fulfilled. Isaac was deeply loved by Abraham, and he also represented the miraculous fulfillment of God's promise. So they'd waited 25 years. You know how, and this is where I always try to give them the benefit of the doubt, because to us it's like, every other chapter, like Abraham is needing reassurance that this is going to happen. Because to us, it's every other chapter. We can all read it right there. To them, it's decades.
Yeah.
You know? So it gives you a lot of time. I myself have experienced things God said was going to happen and had to wait years. And I question myself. I'm like, did I really hear that right? You know? Am I sure that's going to happen? You know? Do I need that's so I have a lot of forgiveness for Abraham needing reassurance in that kind of and having that kind of insecurity. Now Abraham was told to go to the region of Moriah. There he was to take Isaac and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on a mountain that God would show him. This must have reminded Abraham of God's original call when the Lord told Abraham, then known as Abram, to relocate to the land he would show him. That was in Genesis 12. Moriah was also where Solomon later built the temple of the Lord. That was in 2 Chronicles 3:1. And it was where even later the perfect Lamb of God would be sacrificed for the sins of the world. To sacrifice one's own child was an unfathomable command, and later God would clearly prohibit this practice in Leviticus 20:1-5 and Deuteronomy 18:10. However, in the years to come, God did command that the firstborn be dedicated to him, with humans and some animals redeemed in order to spare their lives. Exodus 13:1-2, and also verses 11-16. This was a reminder of how the Lord had delivered his people from slavery in Egypt. There regarding Moriah, let me give you a couple more events there that happens in that same area. 1 Chronicles 21, verses 18-30, King David offers the sacrifices. That's on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, if memory serves. Same place, guys, you know. And then in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 1, the very next chapter, David declares it will be the site of the temple that his son is going to build on there that we just talked about here, right? 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, it is the site where Solomon builds the temple 480 years after the Exodus from Egypt. That's according to 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1. So God just told him to go out into a place which might as well be the wilderness as far as anybody's concerned, and just happened to, is it coincidence? No, God told him to do it. Look at the second question where it says, how do you think Abraham's past experiences with God helped him trust in God even during an extremely difficult test? I wrote down a few. Did you write down any examples there?
We talked about that already.
Yeah.
I said Abraham's faith had to grow.
Yeah.
He had failed several tests of faith and trust before maturing to his pinnacle of faith.
Indeed. Yeah. And the ones I wrote down, so we already read chapter 15, wherein God presents himself as a portion of the sacrifice in association with the covenant itself. We have the Lord's multiple appearances, theophanies, either through messengers or through the voice of the Lord himself. Then there in chapter 14, where he rescues Lot from the kings of 4 or 5, the armies of 4 or 5 towns that were that kidnapped him from Sodom, if I'm not mistaken, and then going on to meet Melchizedek, which is an event we don't talk about nearly enough in the church, in my opinion. And then, what was that other thing that happened to him? The birth of Isaac to a 90-year-old woman. Okay, and then and as we've concluded, we can't seem to come up with any lapses of faith that he experienced after that. But all of this, of course, did he still have lapses in faith before that? Yeah. In between those events. So with verse 3, here's the commentary on verse 3. Abraham instantly prepared. He didn't wait around. He instantly prepared and departed for the place God had told him about. He did not question the Lord's command, but demonstrated immediate and unwavering obedience. He did not try to come up with an alternate plan, but like he did before. Has he ever done that before? Yeah, I think so. But trusted that God would provide for him, even if the instructions did not make sense at the time. Okay? And again, we've questioned, it kind of might have made sense to him a little bit in some ways, as the Hebrews looked at it in the New Testament. All right, with that, will somebody read verses 6-8 for me?
Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife, as the two of them went on together.
Can I just stop you right there with verse 6? Okay?
Mhm.
Look at verse 6. If the imagery does not smack you in the face right there, then we need to skip to the New Testament. Okay? We need to skip to Christ carrying his cross to Golgotha.
Yes.
If that imagery doesn't
And
just
he is
punch you in the
sacrifice,
face,
yes.
all right?
Yeah.
All right? Read that again for us, Reverend Stone.
Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife, as the two of them went on together.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. What if Isaac had been sacrificed?
He couldn't. He couldn't.
Would that had been enough?
It couldn't be sacrificed.
That wouldn't have been enough.
No,
It couldn't be sacrificed.
wouldn't have been enough.
That wouldn't have been
No,
enough.
it couldn't be sacrificed.
No.
Isaac couldn't be sacrificed.
Uh.
Because what God planned was,
Mhm.
is a demonstration for us today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reverend Stone.
There's another image that just kind of popped in my head
Yeah,
from verse 6.
yeah.
You know, when it says that Christ humbled himself and became obedient,
Obedience.
even
Yes.
to the death of the cross.
Yes.
Isaac
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
is, I want to say, crazy obedient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
You're going to kill me?
Yes, sir.
And he's willingly allowing this to happen.
To happen. Happen. So,
And there must have been a purpose that, well, hey, he may have been thinking, well, you know what? If my father has this kind of faith, I also have this kind of faith in God.
that's
The
right.
Lord will provide. So I'm just going to be obedient and see what God is up to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, and we're going to discuss that when we get to verse 9 too, like his involvement in what is happening.
that's right.
So, go ahead and give me. We do 6 through. Let's try to get it this time, and I won't interrupt you.
Okay.
6 through 8, please.
Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied, "the fire and the wood are here." Isaac said, "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together.
That's right.
Yeah.
Father, yes, my son, Hineni. All right, here's the commentary, 6 through 8. Isaac questioned his father about why they did not have an animal for the burnt offering. In reply, Abraham boldly stated that God himself would provide a lamb for sacrifice. He did not know how God would take care of them in this situation, but he knew that the Lord could be trusted. God had promised Abraham many descendants, and Abraham knew that God would not break his word.
Amen.
I wonder at what point Isaac might have been wondering. I wonder, because at this point, Isaac is questioning. Okay, all right. But again, let's get through verse 9 before we go crazy on that point. Will you give me verse 9, please? Anybody? Reverend Stone, anybody?
When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Keep going.
Abraham did not falter in obeying the Lord. He built an altar as necessary and arranged the wood on it. He then tied Isaac up and laid him on the altar, even though every fiber of his being must have been fighting against doing so. And this is where again, I don't knock the author for saying that Abraham might have been fighting his own conscience here or whatnot. because, again, there is the Hebrew view that this was a necessary part of the fulfillment of the covenant, right? So now this brings up plenty other questions. He's just built his fourth altar in the Bible here. The word 6123 akad means to bind, and this is the only occurrence when it says he's tied Isaac. This is the only occurrence of this word, the binding of Isaac. By the way, in most of our Protestant Bibles, the heading on this might say something like Abraham's faith tested, or the offering of Isaac, as one of my Bibles says here. But when we're talking about the Torah, a heading like that is frequently called the story, the binding of Isaac. So that being kind of the central point, the subjugation of will to the Lord, or to his father, and in turn to the Lord. So, and then again, that's the Hebrew view on this. Here's a part of the commentary about another commentary. It says, though Isaac is referred to as a lad, he could, and that's how it's referred to in an English translation in the Torah. Though Isaac is referred to as a lad, he could have been as old as his mid-30s, given the age of his mother in the next chapter. Though it is uncertain, rabbinic tradition suggests Isaac may have been implicit in his own potential sacrifice, another parallel to Christ. Because Christ went, not my will but yours, and then he went.
Yes.
Then he aligned his will with the Father, and he went. Okay, and then I would argue, given the 100-year difference in ages, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Could Abraham have overpowered his teenage or mid-20s or mid-30s son? I tend to think not.
You certainly could.
Okay. Reverend Stone, if you would keep going with me, please, on 10 and 11.
10 and 11. And then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here am I, he replied.
Here I am, or here am I, Hineni 2009.
Here I am.
Here's the commentary. At the very moment Abraham was about to strike Isaac and kill him, God intervened. By the way, this is the sacrificial system was akin to the kosher butchers today. Okay, whenever you kill an animal or a sacrifice of any kind, you do it as quickly as you can, with one strike if you can do it. Okay, so this wasn't going to be like he could kind of hurt him a little bit and then kind of see where he goes. Maybe just give him a little paper cut and then see if God stops him or whatever. Okay, this was going to be a death blow from the beginning, and Abraham knew how to do it. Here, at that very moment, Abraham was about to strike Isaac and kill him. God intervened. The angel of the Lord called Abraham's name as God had done at the beginning of his journey, and Abraham responded the same way. Hineni, here I am. Here am I, as I think King James probably says. God's action here was as dramatic as what he had instructed Abraham to do in the first place. Okay, now look at the realization of Abraham at this point. He's got the knife, all right? He's about to do it. He knows, Abraham at this point knows this is about to happen. And he thinks he's not going to be stopped. So if we're looking at this in terms of a test, God already knew he was going to pass it, but now Abraham knows. Now Abraham, God, I'm sorry that I almost sold my wife to a king. I'm sorry I didn't have faith in you that this son that I'm about to kill would even be born to a 90-year-old woman. I am sorry that I had tried to fulfill your plans through a slave woman, and Hagar. causing the birth of Ishmael. I'm sorry that I've had so little faith in you, and you've done so much for me, and even to the point of this miraculous child I have right now. Well, now I know I have demonstrated the faith. My faith has become action, as James would put it in the second chapter of his book, because I know I was about to kill my kid. Right?
God was under control, boy.
Absolutely.
God was under control. From the digging into the hand.
Let's get verse 12 for me, please.
Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son.
Your only son.
It says so right there.
Yeah.
Your only son.
It's 3 times. Every translation I've ever said says that twice. And it says that even your son, your only son. That's 3 times in this chapter alone. Okay? Or as the Greeks would put it, and I talked about this when Pastor Connie and I taught this, monogenes. 1 gene, single genes, your only son, as it would be put in the Greek. Here's the commentary. A true worshiper of God does not hold anything back from him, even his or her most valuable possession, which was his only son. Okay? And how many sons did God have? Hold on, let me think. 1. A true worshiper of God does not hold anything back from him, even his or her most valuable possession. God's test determined that Abraham truly trusted and believed in him. Abraham did not put anything above the Lord and truly feared him. This fear was seen in Abraham's reverence for the Lord, in his implicit trust and immediate obedience. Abraham had not withheld from God his only son. The same concept is expressed in Romans 8:32 when discussing the fact that God willingly gave his one and only son for our sins. Okay? And you recall the parallel I made at the beginning. Not all of you were here for this. Same thing after Peter denied his master 3 times. To the point where he didn't even feel like a disciple anymore. He was not counted among the disciples when the angel or the man spoke to the women by the tomb. And then Jesus came back and gave him 3 chances to recommit to his faith and to his belief. And this is the same thing that Abraham is getting now. He's getting a chance to not only, perhaps in his own mind, I don't want to say atone in terms of a sacrificial system, but he is atoning for the lack of faith that he's shown from previous events, and now Abraham himself knows, knows the results of the test. But
I have a comment on the commentary for verse 12.
Go for it, please.
Where it says a true worshiper of God does not hold anything back from him, even his or her most valuable possession. And since God does not require us to give our children, so the next most valuable possession to us is us. And we says, Romans 12:1 and 2, I beseech you therefore, brother, by the mercy of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God's spiritual service. So, what God wants for us is to give ourselves.
Since you're bringing up Romans right now, let's look at 8:32 real quick. He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? You know what I mean? If he's going to give us his only son.
My brother, do you know with Peter, all what God did to Peter was restore his joy
Mhm.
back to him. That's all God did to Peter.
Yeah.
So although Peter did not have it, God just restored back to Peter the joy.
You know what I like about that? Not only did he restore the joy, but he didn't restore it by saying everything's going to be great.
That's right.
Hey, everything's going to be great now, Peter.
That's right.
No, he restored it by saying, you're back in the fold and it's going to be bad for a while.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's not going to be
Yes.
good.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
I'm going to, let's see here. Let's finish off with this commentary and then I'll provide a few more things. Somebody read verses 13 and 14 for me.
Abraham looked up and saw there in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided.
Yahweh Yireh, or Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Yireh. That's another way we put that as we go through the translations down through the years from Hebrew into Latin into English. Here's the commentary on 13 and 14. God took care of things by providing a ram that was caught by its horns in a bush. Abraham used this ram as his burnt offering and called that place, the Lord will provide. Then and now, God is faithful to take care of the needs of his children, including by enabling us to do what he asks of us. What does that mean, then and now? Or now and then? I think all the time. I'm not sure what that means. All right, so that's up through 14. Let's kind of finish out the chapter here. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. Another theophany. There's frequently in the Bible when it says that God is talking to somebody directly or the Lord is talking to somebody directly. The Hebrews hold very, they hold very stiffly to the idea that nobody can hear the voice of God without dying. Nobody can see God without being destroyed and whatnot. And there's countless examples in the Old Testament of people who think they're going to die because they saw the Lord. All right? But this is an example wherein the angel of the Lord, a messenger, okay, because by the way, the word angel means messenger. A messenger of the Lord called again to Abram from heaven. Verse 16, this is what the Lord says, because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your son,
Your only son.
I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies. I swear by my own name, or as the Hebrew may put it, I have sworn by myself. And I already read to you chapter 15, the significance of God swearing by himself, by his own name. And I already read you Hebrews chapter 6, 13 through 20, when we talked about the significance of that. There was nothing more pure that God could swear by, right? What's up, Corey?
So when it says the capital A angel of the Lord called to Abraham the second time, is that God? Or is that an angel sent on behalf of God? 'Cause like other times,
Which verse? Give me the verse real quick.
Verse 15.
Verse 15.
Other times it'll be a lowercase a when they say angel, but in my translation, in the New King James, it says A with capital.
Okay, so that's a good question. We're going to talk about that. I'll give you that for a second. And we'll see this a lot, especially in the NASB and whatnot. It's a drafting off of a habit that was kind of developed. I don't think the King James was the first English translation to do this, but a lot of times whenever we have a common noun that refers to God, it could be angel, it could be spirit, it could be a lot of things like that, or even pronouns or my or his, he, such things as that. they'll frequently be capitalized. That's kind of a tradition held over from, it probably gained most popularity with the King James, the original version of the King James, though it had a lot less examples of capitalization there. There were no capitals or lowercase in the Hebrew. There were no capitals or lowercase or even spaces between words in the Greek, but that's a tradition that's held over when it's talking about an angel of the Lord, this being a theophany, this being a manifestation, a communication directly from God. I don't think it's inappropriate that some English translations might capitalize the A there, since some people will say this is a direct manifestation of God himself. You know what I mean? So that's why you might see some capitalizations in there and whatnot. I've seen capitalizations of things in some versions of the Bible where it's kind of like, I'm not sure that's directly relating to God sometimes, but this would be an example where I don't think that's inappropriate. Verse 16, God has sworn by his own name. Verse 17, I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. All because you have obeyed me. So there by the end, he's going to be blessed because he has obeyed God, though Abraham is best known to be accounted by his faith more than his actions, right? It's not difficult to rectify that, though. His faith becomes actions. Again, James chapter 2, faith without deeds is dead. Right? Verse 19, then they returned to the servants and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. And then we're going to see, I won't read these last few verses of the chapter, except to say they're setting up the characters for the next few stories, including Rebekah, who will be the wife of Isaac. And that's a beautiful story told in chapter 24 when we get to that. Some people might ask, hey, where was Sarah in this whole thing? Where's the mother of the kid that's about to be killed? I would direct you to Genesis 23. Just look over to, just look one page over, one chapter over. When Sarah was 127 years old, she died at Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, in the land of Canaan. There Abraham mourned and wept for her. Why is she in Hebron? It's theorized that, I'll put it this way, if I were to make a movie of these events and whatnot, I would have Abraham and Isaac and the servants walking off out of sight while Sarah's hanging out in the tent. And then she comes out and she sees the lamb that they were supposed to take with them. And then she figures, they're not taking a sacrifice. What's going on? Okay? Eventually, it's theorized that she came to find out that her husband almost killed their kid. And now she's in Hebron. This is not like, and this isn't the kind of thing that, it wasn't the day where a wife would just go for a day trip to Laughlin or something like that. You know what I mean? It is significant that she was no longer there in Beersheba with the rest of her family. So it is theorized that's the reason why she did not die at home. So anyway, that's Genesis chapter 22, a story when it comes to the patriarchs. I somewhat think of Abraham as the best of the fathers. I don't know that he was the best of the sons. I tend to think of Isaac as the best of the sons, because later in Isaac's journey, after he does a lot of traveling himself, he will come back to this land. He will redig the wells that the Philistines fill in. He will do everything he can to carry on the cultural and spiritual traditions of his father. And he will be somewhat of a predecessor to the fifth commandment, to honor your mother and father, even before we had the commandments. And that's what I think of Isaac. And that's all I have to say about that. Deacon Clark, what was your question about? I forget what it was now.
Yeah, do the angels do everything that
Oh,
God commands?
okay. Let me let me bounce this on off of you guys in terms of the will of angels. Okay, and you guys give me some feedback. Tell me whether you think I'm off base for this. Do you remember in Acts where it says Stephen, who was there in that hearing, which is akin to a trial, not the way we think of it today, but it was kind of a trial there among in the Jewish council.
Yeah.
After he had given his testimony, it said his face was like that of an angel.
Angel.
Do you guys remember that part?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, his face was glowing like an angel," or that's a common interpretation.
Yeah.
Is that somehow Stephen was glowing in front of everybody. With respect, I disagree. We've got a guy who's just given his testimony. If he's glowing, do you think they're going to kill him? I don't think so.
See what you're saying?
I think his face was like that of an angel in terms of, I don't want to say that he was passive, but he was relaxed.
Peace.
He had peace. That's better. He's not passive. He's peaceful. He's kind of like, I've done what God told me to do. I have spoken truth to power, and now it's in God's hands. Even if I'm going to get stoned to death, I did my duty.
Yeah.
And I don't think Stephen really, at that point, I don't think he really cared what was going to happen to him. And I think that the will of angels is somewhat similar in that they don't really care. They are designed to follow the orders of God. They don't have a personal will as we do, as we think of it.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
They have free will. I
Yeah.
think that they can think freely. However,
Oh yeah.
Satan definitely made us aware that he had the ability to think freely when he leads a rebellion
Mhm.
in heaven. So there is definitely that freedom to say, you know what, I don't think, I think this.
Okay, let me ask you this though. And I know that we've taken like 2 verses out of the whole Bible to make a whole narrative about the fall of Satan and such things as that. And it was built on through the Divine Comedy and Renaissance art and all this
Certainly
other
not,
stuff.
Not trying to
Okay.
minimize it or
Right.
oversimplify it,
Yeah.
just knowing that he had that ability to lead a rebellion.
Mhm.
So he had the ability to think
That's right.
what he thought.
But I don't think here's where it is. Here's where I think about the angels that followed him. Okay, assuming that there were a third of heaven, though again that's
I don't
kind
know
of
the number.
contrived
I don't
from
know
a
the
verse.
number.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's kind of that percentage is kind of contrived from a verse in the Bible, which we can discuss another time. But I think that the angels who followed Satan and therefore became demons
Yes.
did not actually care. They were simply designed to follow that chain of command that led to Satan. Does that make sense? And they're just doing what Satan says, and I don't think they have a free will. They may have an opinion, I don't, as far as we know, but it is. I can't find an example in the Bible in which an angel even inserts his own opinion on anything. You know what I mean? And please push back on me if you can think of an example. But to answer your question,
Yeah.
I don't think that the angels that are under God have any choice, or is even within their nature to disobey God. And I don't think that the angels that are under Satan or the demons that are under Satan have it within their nature to disobey Satan or to step out of that chain of command.
But remember,
I could be wrong. This is kind of extra biblical stuff I'm talking about.
remember, every time the Bible says the angels of the Lord, they are commanded by God. Because they can't do nothing without God gave them information to do what they do. Satan, who was an angel, archangel, God himself gave Satan that authority too, to do what he do. Because of himself, he can't do nothing. Because God already come, God already know that there will be a heaven and a hell. So God himself create that, where we give you a choice. Just like today, we give you a choice, where you either can do right by serving him as an angel of the Lord, or you can do evil to follow Satan to hell. So whatever, from Genesis to Revelation, before God didn't come on the earth, he was God. And you can't.
He gives us a choice that he doesn't even afford to his own angels.
That's right.
Yeah.
So